Dorothy Calloway pressed the telegram against her chest and tore it in half. Not slowly, not with trembling hands. She tore it the way you tear something that was never going to save you anyway. Sharp, final, without a sound. The platform at Abilene was empty except for the wind and one railroad lantern swinging in the dark. No wagon waiting. No man with his hat in his hands. No wedding. Just December cold biting through wool that was never thick enough, and 17 cents sitting at the bottom of a purse that had held so much more. She had come to Kansas to become a wife. She was going to sleep in the snow instead. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell, and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far Dorothy's story travels. Now stay with me. This is only the beginning. The man at the ticket window did not look up when she asked. "Excuse me," Dorothy said, her voice steady, even though nothing else about her was. Is there a livery or a boarding house within walking distance?" The man slid his spectacles down his nose, glanced at her carpetbag, glanced at the empty platform behind her, and said, "You got someone coming for you?" "I did," she said. "He isn't." He pushed his spectacles back up. "Boarding house on Chestnut. $1 a night. Pay up front." Then he pulled the window shutter closed between them, like she was a draft he'd decided not to let in. Dorothy stood there for a moment, with her hands still raised, and her dignity still technically intact. Then she picked up her bag and walked. Abilene, on a Christmas Eve, was loud in all the ways that reminded you how quiet your own life was. Families spilled out of the church at the end of First Street. Women in their good wool coats. Men with children on their shoulders. Lanterns swinging from gloved hands. The air smelled of pine resin and wood smoke, and something roasting. Pork or venison. Coming from somewhere warm that did not include her. She kept her eyes forward. She had learned that much from Cincinnati. When you are in trouble, you do not look like you are in trouble. You walk like you have somewhere to be. The boarding house on Chestnut had a green door and a sign that needed repainting. Dorothy knocked once, firm. A woman in her 40s answered. Red hair gone mostly silver. Eyes that took inventory fast and quietly. "One night," Dorothy said, "I was told $1. $1 up front. No cooking after 8. The woman, Nora Fitch, according to the painted plank beside the door, leaned one shoulder against the frame, not unfriendly, but not soft either. "You alone?" "Yes." "Husband coming?" Dorothy looked at her straight. "No." Nora studied her for exactly 3 seconds. "Come in, then. Mind the rug. My boy left his boots in the hall again, and I haven't had the energy to argue about it." Inside was warm. That was the first thing. Warm in the way that hits you behind the eyes when you've been cold for too long, when your body had quietly started to negotiate with itself about how much cold was survivable. Dorothy blinked hard and followed Nora up a narrow staircase. The room was small. A cot, a washstand, a single window that looked out at the back of a feed store. But the quilt was heavy, and there was a candle already lit on the shelf. "Supper's done," Nora said from the doorway, "but there's bread and cold beans on the stove if you want them. Help yourself." Dorothy set her bag down. "Thank you, Mrs. Fitch." "Nora," she paused. "You got a name?" "Dorothy Calloway." Nora nodded once, as if filing it somewhere useful. "Well, Dorothy Calloway, whatever brought you here and whatever didn't show up to meet you, that's your business. Get some rest." She left without ceremony. The door clicked shut with the quiet of someone who understood that some nights required no more conversation. Dorothy sat on the edge of the cot. She did not cry. She had done her crying on the train somewhere between Topeka and the Kansas Flats, pressed into the corner of a second-class car with her face turned to the window so the man across from her wouldn't see. She had allowed herself exactly 45 minutes of that, and then she had stopped, because she could not afford to arrive broken. She pulled the two halves of the telegram from her coat pocket and laid them on the quilt like evidence. Arrangement ended. Stop. Circumstances changed. Stop. Regret inconvenience. Stop. R. Calloway Holt. Not even the man she was meant to marry. His cousin. A man named Warren Holt, who had brokered the arrangement through a correspondence service in Cincinnati, who had exchanged letters with her for 4 months, who had included a photograph of the ranch. Wide, flat Kansas land with a solid barn and the suggestion of prosperity. And who had, apparently, decided sometime in the last week that the arrangement no longer suited his purposes. She did not know why. She did not know what circumstances changed meant in legal terms or in human terms. She only knew that she had sold every piece of furniture she owned, settled her landlady's debt, and purchased a one-way ticket on the understanding that a man named Gerald Aldous was waiting in Abilene to make her his wife. Gerald Aldous was not waiting. Gerald Aldous had apparently never been told to wait. She tucked the telegram pieces back into her coat. 17 cents and a carpet bag, a job that no longer existed. The law office back in Cincinnati had been taken over by the dead attorney's eldest son, who had handed her 3 weeks' wages and a handshake that lasted half a second. A family that was not a family. An aunt who had made her position clear the day Dorothy turned 20 and stopped being useful as a domestic arrangement. And now this. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. All right, she told herself. All right. You have done harder things than this. You have been left before. You know how to start again. She had no idea how to start again, but she had always been good at pretending she did. She woke to the sound of something hitting the floor downstairs, and a child's voice saying, with great conviction, "That was already broken." It was not yet full light. Dorothy lay still for a moment, listening. Then she rose, washed her face with the cold water from the basin, pinned her hair back as neatly as her fingers could manage, and went downstairs. The kitchen was narrow and efficient, the kind of room used hard every day by someone who didn't have the patience for anything that didn't work. Nora stood at the stove with a cast iron pan in one hand, and an expression that suggested she was reconsidering several of her life's choices. At the table sat a boy of about 8, with hair the same faded red as his mother's, and a piece of charcoal in his hand, and what appeared to be a drawing of a horse on the wooden table surface itself. "Samuel," Nora said, without turning from the stove. "I'm almost done," the boy said. "You're done now." The boy looked up, saw Dorothy, and stopped. He had eyes that were too observant for 8 years old. The kind of eyes that had been watching adults figure things out for long enough to have formed opinions about all of them. "You're the woman from last night," he said. "I am," Dorothy said. "Mama said you came on the train alone." "Samuel," Nora said again, sharper. "It's all right," Dorothy said. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat. "I did come alone. Does that seem strange to you?" The boy considered this seriously. "A little. Most ladies who come alone are either running away from something or running toward something." "Sam." "Which one are you?" he asked Dorothy. Dorothy looked at him. "I thought I was running toward something," she said. "Turns out it wasn't there." He nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed a theory. "That happens to Mama sometimes, too. She ordered a new cook stove from the catalog, and it came broken." Nora set a plate of biscuits and a small jar of preserves on the table between them, and pointed at her son. "Eat. Stop philosophizing." To Dorothy, she said, "Coffee's on. Help yourself." Dorothy rose and poured her own cup. When she sat back, Nora took the chair at the head of the table, and the three of them ate without the weight of performed politeness. "I need to find work," Dorothy said after a while. "I have enough for 2 more nights here, maybe 3 if I don't eat." Nora looked at her over the rim of her cup. "What can you do?" "I was a legal secretary for 6 years. I can write, keep books, file correspondence, draft documents." She paused. "I can also bake, clean, manage a household ledger, and I'm a reasonable hand with livestock if it comes to that." "Legal secretary," Nora repeated. "In Abilene. I understand that may be optimistic. There's one law office, belongs to Judge Caraway, and he's had the same secretary since 1869. Nora set her cup down. "But the hotel on 2nd Street is looking for someone to manage their accounts. Previous girl ran off with one of the cattle buyers in October. I could put in a word." Dorothy felt something unclench in her chest. "I'd be grateful." "Don't be grateful yet. It pays less than you're worth, and the owner is a difficult man." Nora stood and began clearing plates. "But it's work. And in Abilene, in December, work is work." Samuel had been quiet for several minutes. Now he looked up from the biscuit he'd been pulling apart into careful pieces. "Are you going to stay?" he asked Dorothy. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. He seemed to find this acceptable. "Okay, but if you do," he said, returning to his biscuit, "you can draw on the table if you want. Mama only gets mad if you use the good charcoal." The hotel job was a real thing. That much was true. The part Nora had understated was that the hotel owner, a man named Clement Briggs, who had the handshake of a man who used it as a weapon, looked at Dorothy's references, carefully written on the letterhead of the late attorney Harlan Wood of Cincinnati, and said, "You're not from here." "No, sir." "Why'd you come to Abilene?" There was a version of this answer that was simpler. Dorothy chose the simpler one. "I had a business arrangement that fell through. I needed work." Briggs set the references down on his desk without reading them fully. "The position is accounts and correspondence. 6 days a week, half-day Sunday. Pay is $10 a month, meals included if you're on property at mealtime." It was less than she had made in Cincinnati. It was more than nothing. "I'll take it," she said. He hired her on the spot, which should have felt like a victory. But when she walked out of his office and into the hotel lobby, she heard his voice through the door he hadn't bothered to close all the way. He was talking to someone. His foreman, it sounded like. "Mail order girl," Briggs said. "Arrangement fell through. Desperate enough to work for what I'm offering." Dorothy kept walking. Through the lobby, out the front door, into the cold street. She stood on the boards of the sidewalk and let the Kansas wind hit her face, and did not allow herself to feel anything about what she had just heard. She had a job. That was what mattered today. She would feel the rest of it later. Or she wouldn't. She had learned that survival had a strict budget, and you could not afford to spend it all at once. She had been in Abilene 4 days when she first saw August McAllister. She was coming out of the dry goods store with a paper-wrapped block of salt and a spool of thread she'd bought with the advance on her first week's pay. Small things, practical things, the building blocks of a life assembled piece by piece, when a wagon rolled past, and something in the way the man on the bench sat stopped her. He was tall in the seat, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a jaw that was working on something. Not food, she thought. A problem. He had that look of a man who argued with things privately, who kept his disputes with the world internal, and arrived at his own conclusions without seeking a second opinion. His coat was good quality, but old, worn at the left cuff, where a working man always wore first. He didn't look at her. He wasn't looking at anything in particular. He passed, and the wagon kept going, and Dorothy stood on the sidewalk with her salt and her thread and watched him disappear around the corner toward the stockyard. She had no reason to think about him after that. She thought about him anyway. The account books at the Briggs Hotel were a disaster. Not dramatically, not in the way of obvious fraud or spectacular incompetence, but in the slow, accumulated way of someone who had kept records the way you keep a secret. Vaguely, hoping no one asked too many questions. Dorothy sat at the small desk in the back office on her first proper working day, turned page after page, and felt her old Cincinnati self come alive in her hands. She liked this. She had always liked this. The logic of numbers. The story they told when you read them right. Every entry was a decision someone had made, a need someone had, a choice that had consequences. You could see the whole shape of a business in its books, if you knew how to look. By noon, she had found 3 billing errors, 1 missed receivable going back to August, and what appeared to be a deliberate underreporting of room occupancy for the month of October that she filed away without comment. Briggs came in at 1 o'clock, looked over her shoulder without asking, and said, "You actually know what you're doing." "Yes," Dorothy said. She did not add, "Sir." He left without saying anything else. Dorothy counted that as a reasonable first day. She was still at the desk at 4:30, copying her corrections into a clean ledger in her own hand, when the office door opened again. She expected Briggs. She looked up. It was August McAllister. In person, he was larger than he'd looked on the wagon. Not threatening, just the physical fact of a man who had spent many years doing physical work. He held his hat in his hands, turning the brim once, twice, in that unconscious way men did when they were about to say something they hadn't quite finished thinking. "Pardon me," he said. "I'm looking for the accounts office." "You found it," Dorothy said. "You're the new girl?" He said it without any judgment in it, just information, a fact to orient himself. "I'm the new accounts manager," she said. "Dorothy Calloway." He studied her for a moment. Then he nodded, as if that answer had closed the question. "August McAllister. I've got a cattle contract dispute with this hotel going back to September. Briggs owes me $60 for a delivery his foreman already signed for." Dorothy opened the new ledger. "Do you have the receipt?" He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper, crumpled, but there. She smoothed it on the desk, read it, checked the entry she'd been copying, and found the line within 40 seconds. "You're right," she said. "It's here. It was filed under a different account heading, which is why it looked unpaid. I can have a corrected voucher drawn up for Mr. Briggs to sign today." McAllister looked at her, not the way Briggs had looked at her, not assessing, not measuring what she was worth to him. Just looking, the way you look at something unexpected. "That's 6 weeks of arguing with Briggs and his man out front," he said. "I know," Dorothy said. "It's also a very simple bookkeeping error." She paused. "Or it was deliberate. I haven't decided which yet." A beat of silence, and then August McAllister almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile, more like the idea of one, held back for reasons she couldn't know yet. But it was something. "I appreciate it, Miss Calloway," he said, with the flat Kansas directness of a man who meant exactly what he said, and nothing more and nothing less. "Mr. McAllister," she said. He put his hat back on and walked out. Dorothy sat for a moment with the receipt still in her hand. She went back to the ledger. It was Sam who told her about the arrangement. He had developed a habit of appearing in the hotel kitchen around 4:30, ostensibly to deliver messages for his mother, but primarily, Dorothy suspected, to steal biscuits from the cook's tray, and to talk to Dorothy, who had made the error of answering his questions honestly the first time, and had thus been designated a reliable adult. "You know that rancher who came in yesterday?" Sam said, sitting on the edge of the kitchen table that the cook had already told him 3 times not to sit on. "Mr. McAllister," Dorothy said. He was supposed to get married," Sam said. "That's what Mama says." Dorothy looked up. "He put an advertisement in the correspondence service. Same one." Sam stopped, tilted his head. "Same one you used," he said, piecing it together with that 8-year-old precision that lands like a rock in still water. "Oh." "Don't," Dorothy said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "Good." Sam was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "The man who was supposed to marry you, Samuel. Was it Warren Holt?" Dorothy set down her pen. "Why do you ask that?" Sam's expression shifted, not quite guilty, but adjacent. "Because I heard Mama and Mrs. Carroway talking, and they said Warren Holt pulled out of the correspondence arrangement because he found out Mr. McAllister was looking for the same woman." The room was very quiet. "Say that again," Dorothy said. "I'm not supposed to know," Sam said quickly. "I heard it through the wall." Dorothy stood up slowly. "What do you mean, looking for the same woman?" Sam bit his lip. "I think I got that part wrong," he said, in the tone of a child who had said too much and was attempting to retreat. "I might have meant different woman. I don't know." But Dorothy was already thinking, already pulling the thread. Warren Holt had brokered the arrangement. Warren Holt had also, apparently, pulled out of it. Not because circumstances had changed in his life, but because something else had changed. Something that involved August McAllister and the correspondence service and a ranch outside Abilene that was either in trouble or was valuable enough that someone wanted to control who came near it. She sat back down. Her hands were steady. She picked up her pen. "Sam," she said quietly. "Yeah?" "Don't repeat that to anyone." "I wasn't going to," he said. "I'm not stupid." "No," she said. "You're really not." She went back to the bill, but the numbers looked different now. Everything looked different. She was not an almost bride who had been left on a platform by a telegram. She was a piece on someone else's board, moved into position without her knowledge, then removed when the position became inconvenient. Dorothy Calloway had spent 6 years in a law office. She knew exactly what that meant. And she was going to find out what Warren Holt was protecting before he had the chance to bury it somewhere she couldn't dig. She did not go looking for August McAllister. That was the first thing she told herself. She was going to the land office on Maple Street because the hotel had a deed dispute on file that Briggs needed documented, and the land office kept public records, and public records were her job. That was all. The land office was a single room that smelled of old paper and lamp oil, staffed by a thin man named Percival Adder, who wore the expression of someone who had been interrupted from something important every time anyone walked through the door. Dorothy presented her credentials, the hotel letterhead, Briggs's signature, the case number, and Percival Adder led her to a shelf of bound ledgers with the enthusiasm of a man escorting someone to a dentist. She found what she needed for Briggs in under 10 minutes. What she found for herself took another 20, and Percival Adder had long since retreated to his desk and his interrupted importance by the time she stood very still in front of an open land record and read the same paragraph 3 times. The McAllister Ranch, 240 acres on the East Flat, deeded to one Thomas McAllister in 1861, transferred to August McAllister upon death of the original holder in 1871, carried a lien. Not large, not yet, but the lien holder was a firm called Holt and Associates, registered in Abilene, and it had been placed in September of this year, 6 weeks before Warren Holt had sent Dorothy a telegram telling her the arrangement was canceled. She closed the ledger, set it back on the shelf with both hands, walked out of the land office into the cold Abilene street, and stood there with the wind in her face, thinking about a man she had met exactly once, for approximately 7 minutes, over a billing error in a hotel back office. She thought about his worn cuff, the way he'd turned his hat, the almost smile that had lived and died in the space of a second. She thought about Sam's voice through the kitchen wall. He found out Mr. McAllister was looking for the same woman. She went back to work. 2 days passed. On the third day, McAllister came back to the hotel. Dorothy heard him before she saw him. His voice carried from the lobby, low and flat, with that particular Kansas patience that was not soft but was not hot either. The voice of a man who had been arguing the same point for long enough that he no longer needed volume to make it. "I'm not here about the voucher," he was saying to the clerk at the front desk. "I'm here because Briggs sent a man out to my property yesterday with a document I did not request and did not agree to sign." Dorothy set down her pen and walked to the office doorway. Briggs was in the lobby now, thick in the chest, smiling the way he smiled when he thought he held better cards. "Mr. McAllister, it's a standard easement agreement. Nothing unusual about it." "An easement across my northern pasture giving this hotel access to the creek feed is not standard," McAllister said. "And sending a man out without prior correspondence is not how business gets done. We've been neighbors on that water source for 4 years. You've been a hotel. I've been a working ranch. Those are not the same kind of neighbor." McAllister's jaw was set. "I won't sign it." Briggs spread his hands in that reasonable way that was not reasonable at all. "I'd hate for there to be any complications with the outstanding matters between us." There it was. Dorothy had heard that sentence before, in different offices, from different men with different stakes. It was the oldest sentence in the arsenal, vague enough to deny, specific enough to threaten. McAllister heard it too. She could see it in the stillness that came over him, the way a man goes quiet when something confirms what he already suspected. "Miss Calloway," Briggs said, turning suddenly, having noticed her in the doorway. His smile did not change. "Mister, McAllister's voucher has been drawn up, hasn't it?" "It has," Dorothy said. "Bring it out, would you?" She went back to the desk, retrieved the voucher, and returned. She held it out to McAllister directly. He took it, read it once, folded it into his coat. "Thank you," he said, to her and not to Briggs. "You're welcome," she said. Briggs was still smiling. "Think about that easement, August. Neighborly thing to do." McAllister looked at him for one long, flat second. Then he put his hat on and walked out. Briggs turned to Dorothy. The smile was gone. "That man has a stubborn streak wide as the county." "So it seems," Dorothy said neutrally, and went back to the office. She sat down, picked up her pen, put it down again, picked it up. The lien, the easement, a canceled marriage arrangement, timed to coincide with a legal hold placed on land that a neighboring business apparently wanted access to. She was not a lawyer. She had never been a lawyer. She had just spent 6 years close enough to the work to know how the pieces moved. She was looking at a board, and the man who had built it was Warren Holt. She found McAllister at the stockyard that evening. Not by design. She was cutting through on the way back from the dry goods, and nearly walked past him entirely before his voice stopped her. "Miss Calloway." She turned. He was standing at the fence line with a younger man she didn't know, both of them looking at a pen of cattle with the focused attention of men who were discussing something real. He had apparently seen her first. "Mr. McAllister," she said. He said something quietly to the younger man, who moved off toward the far end of the pen. Then McAllister walked to where she stood. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can try," she said. That answer made the almost smile come back. The same one she'd seen in the office. Brief, involuntary, like something that escaped before he could decide whether to let it out. "Fair enough. Did Briggs put you up to pulling those records for him? The hotel's deed dispute?" Dorothy looked at him steadily. "No, that was a legitimate work request." "But you pulled other records while you were there." It was not a question. She held his gaze. "I'm a thorough person." "What did you find?" The stockyard noise filled the pause between them. Cattle moving, men calling, iron on iron from the pens. Dorothy turned the choice over in her mind, once, twice, the way you turn a key before committing to opening a door. "A lien," she said. "Placed in September. Holt and Associates." McAllister was very still. "How much?" $400. He didn't flinch, but something behind his eyes shifted. Not surprise, more like the particular tiredness of a man whose suspicion has just been confirmed. "I knew there was a lien. I didn't know Holt held it." "Did you know Holt brokered the correspondence service that sent me here?" Now the stillness was different. He looked at her fully. "No," he said. "I did not know that." "I used a correspondence service out of Cincinnati," Dorothy said. "A firm called Cowboy and Marsh. Warren Holt was listed as regional representative for Kansas arrangements." She paused. "I have been wondering, since I learned that, what exactly he was doing running a matrimonial correspondence service out of a land and finance office." McAllister pulled his hat off and turned the brim in his hands, the same motion she'd seen in the hotel office, the same private argument being worked through. Then he said, "I registered with a correspondence service in October of last year. My spread is big enough to need 2 people running it. After my wife passed, I let things go." He stopped, started again. "It wasn't about... I needed help on the property. Another pair of hands and someone to..." He stopped again, as if the explanation had more truth in it than he'd intended to give away. "I registered. Never matched. Warren Holt told me in August that the service had no suitable candidates for my situation." The same August that Holt had placed the lien. "He told you there was no one," Dorothy said slowly. "And 2 months later, he sent me a telegram canceling the arrangement I thought I had with a different man." McAllister looked at her. "What man?" "A Gerald Aldous. I've been trying to find any record of him since I arrived." She kept her voice even. "I believe he may not exist." The silence that came after that was the kind that meant they had both arrived at the same place by different roads. "He invented a man," McAllister said finally. "To send me here," Dorothy said, "and then to cancel it and leave me stranded." She watched his face. Why would he do that? McAllister put his hat back on slowly. "Because a woman who arrives in Abilene alone, with no arrangements, has no standing," he said. "No family to speak for her, no contract to enforce, no one to ask questions on her behalf." "And a woman who marries a rancher with a lien against his property," Dorothy said, "becomes party to that debt. She has standing. She can contest a lien. She can demand documentation." "Unless she never existed." "Exactly." They stood there in the cold with the stockyard behind them, and the weight of the thing settled between them, solid now, named. "He was protecting himself," Dorothy said. "He needed to know whether anyone would come looking, whether the service had sent someone who might ask questions. So he sent a ghost, a fake name, a fake arrangement, and waited to see what arrived." "And what arrived," McAllister said, with a flatness in his voice that was not unkind, "was you." "A legal secretary," Dorothy said, "from Cincinnati, who spent 6 years learning how men like Holt build their paper walls." She paused. He underestimated the situation. McAllister looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" she said. "You didn't send the telegram." "No, but I've been in this town 4 months, while Holt's been building this thing around my property, and I've been so busy arguing with Briggs about $60 that I missed it." His jaw worked. "I should have looked harder." "You were looking at the wrong records," Dorothy said. "That's what he wanted." "And you found the right ones in an afternoon." "I had better context," she said simply. He looked at her. "Will you help me?" The question was direct. No softening, no performance of humility, no attempt to make it seem like less than what it was. A man who needed help asking for it. Straight, without the pride wrapped around it that she had seen cripple better men in tighter corners. "That depends," she said, "on what helping you requires." "Documentation," he said. "I need someone who can read the legal construction of the lien and tell me if there's a flaw in it. And I need that done quietly, before Holt realizes his arrangement fell apart in the wrong direction." Dorothy thought of Briggs and his easement, his reasonable smile, the way the two of them, Briggs and Holt, had placed themselves on either side of McAllister's property, like bookends. "The hotel is in on it," she said. "I think so." "That means I can't use the hotel records." "I know." "It also means," she said slowly, "that I'm already in a compromised position. Briggs hired me. If he finds out I'm working against his interests—" "I won't let that land on you," McAllister said. His voice had changed, not louder, but grounded in a way that felt different from reassurance. It felt like a statement of fact. "What you tell me stays with me. Whatever comes out of it, I'll take it through the proper channels. You won't be named." She looked at him. He meant it. She had spent 6 years learning to read the men who sat across desks and said things, and she had become very good at knowing the difference between a man who meant what he said and a man who meant it until it became inconvenient. August McAllister meant it. "All right," she said. "I'll need to see the original lien document. Not the record copy. The original, with the notary seal." "I have it at the ranch," he said. "Then I'll need to come to the ranch." The words were out before she had fully decided on them. He absorbed them without comment, without the flicker of anything inappropriate, without making it into something it wasn't. "Saturday morning," he said. "I'll send a wagon." "I can arrange my own transport," she said. "I know you can," he said, with the almost smile again. And this time, it lasted half a second longer. "But the road out to the East Flav is rough in this weather, and my foreman's coming into town anyway. It's practical." Dorothy considered this. "Saturday," she said. He nodded. "Saturday." He went back to the fence line. She walked on through the stockyard toward Chestnut Street, and she did not allow herself to think about the quality of the evening light, or the way his voice had sounded when he said, "I won't let that land on you." She thought instead about notary seals and the specific legal requirements for placing a lien in the state of Kansas in 1876, which she was going to need to look up before Saturday. Nora was at the kitchen table when Dorothy came in, mending a collar by lamplight. Sam was already in bed. The house was quiet in the way that good houses are at the end of a long day. Dorothy sat down across from her. Nora did not look up from her needle. "You look like you've been thinking too hard," Nora said. "I know something about Warren Holt," Dorothy said. Nora's needle paused for exactly 1 stitch. Then it continued. "What kind of something?" "The kind that would make a reasonable man nervous," Dorothy said. "He placed a lien on the McAllister property in September. He ran the correspondence service that brought me here. Those two things are connected." Nora set the mending down. She looked at Dorothy across the table in the lamplight with those quick, cataloging eyes. "You sure about the connection?" "No," Dorothy said. "That's why I'm going to the ranch Saturday to look at the original document." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Holt's got friends in this town," she said. "The kind of friends that make things complicated for people who ask questions." "I know." "You're not from here. You don't have anyone to stand behind you if it goes wrong." "I know that too." Nora picked up her mending again, turned it in her hands, did not immediately sew. "My husband used to say the most dangerous person in any dispute is the one with nothing left to lose." She glanced up. "You fit that description about as well as anyone I've met." "Is that a warning?" Dorothy asked. "It's an observation," Nora said. "There's a difference." She paused. "It's also a little bit of a compliment." Dorothy looked at the lamp. The flame moved in some small draft that neither of them could feel. "I came here to build a life," she said. "I didn't come here to be used as a piece on someone else's board and then discarded." "No," Nora agreed. "You didn't." "Then I'm going to find out what he built and how he built it." Dorothy pushed her chair back and stood. "And then I'm going to dismantle it." Nora's needle went through the fabric in one smooth motion. "Get some sleep first," she said. "Dismantling things is better when you're rested." Dorothy went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the cot in the small room and looked at the window for a long while. The dark glass, the faint star showing at the upper corner. She thought about Gerald Aldous, who had never existed, and the telegram that had used his name to leave her stranded in the cold. She thought about the lien, $400, placed 6 weeks before she was canceled. She thought about Briggs's smile, and the word complications hanging in a hotel lobby like smoke. And she thought about a rancher turning his hat brim in his hands, saying, "I won't let that land on you," with the flat, weighted certainty of a man who had already decided. She lay back on the quilt. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep easily, but she slept. Saturday came in gray and cold, the sky the color of old iron, the kind of morning that made no promises. Dorothy was ready before the wagon arrived, dressed in her warmest coat, with the lien document checklist she'd written from memory folded in her inside pocket. Kansas lien law requirements, notary obligations, filing deadlines, the specific language that separated a valid claim from a manufactured one. She had spent Thursday evening at the public library on 2nd Street with a copy of the state statutes and a stub of pencil, and she had come away with 4 questions she needed the original document to answer. The wagon was driven by a man of about 50, with a weathered face and no excess conversation, who introduced himself as Eli Crane, ranch foreman, and said nothing else for the entire 40-minute ride, except to point out a shallow crossing on the creek that the horses didn't like. Dorothy spent the ride watching the flat Kansas land open up around her and thinking about notary seals. The McAllister Ranch was working in the way that working things are. Not beautiful, not neglected, just real. A solid barn, a house that had been added to in stages as need required. 2 hands moving between outbuildings in the cold. A dog of indeterminate origin trotted out to inspect the wagon and then lost interest. August McAllister came out of the barn when he heard the wheels. "Miss Calloway," he said, offering a hand down from the wagon seat. His grip was brief and businesslike. "Appreciate you coming out." "I brought a question list," she said. Something in his expression settled. Not relief exactly, but the particular ease of a man who had been uncertain whether to trust his own judgment and had just received confirmation that he'd been right to. "Come inside," he said. "Coffee's on." The inside of the house was the inside of a life lived practically, and without much assistance. Everything had a place, and everything was in it. But there was a quality of careful management about it. The management of a man maintaining something larger than one person could reasonably maintain, doing it through discipline rather than ease. Dorothy noticed the empty chair at the head of the table, the single coffee cup on the shelf, beside two others that hadn't been used in some time. The curtains that were clean, but had been hung without the particular attention that came from someone who cared about curtains. She sat down at the table. He poured 2 cups and set the lien document between them, the original, as she'd asked, bearing a notary seal from the Abilene office of one Douglas Ferris, dated September 14th. Dorothy opened her coat pocket, unfolded her checklist, and got to work. She read the document in full once, without speaking. McAllister sat across from her and drank his coffee and did not interrupt, which she appreciated more than she said. Then she went back to the beginning and read it again, this time running her finger along specific lines. "Who witnessed this?" she said. "Ferris notarized it. I don't know the witnesses." "There are 2 signature lines for witnesses. One is signed J. Briggs." She looked up. "Clement Briggs." McAllister set his cup down. "Say that again?" "J. Briggs. The J could be a middle initial or a family member, but the surname—" "His brother," McAllister said flatly. "Jerome. Runs the feed store on 4th. He stood up, came around the table, and looked at the document over her shoulder. "I never saw the witness signatures. Holtzman left this in my mailbox with a covering note." "He left a lien document in your mailbox," Dorothy said. "I know how it sounds." "It sounds like he expected you not to read it carefully." She moved her finger to the second witness line. "This one is blank." McAllister leaned closer. "Blank. A lien document in Kansas requires 2 witnesses to be legally binding," Dorothy said. "1 signature and 1 blank line means this document, as filed, does not meet the statutory requirement." She looked at him. "If the record copy at the land office also shows only 1 witness, then the lien is invalid," McAllister said. "Then the lien is potentially invalid," she corrected. "A judge would need to confirm it, but yes, that's the argument." She turned in her chair to face him fully. He was standing close enough that she could see the specific quality of attention in his eyes. Focused, not on her exactly, but on the idea she was handing him, turning it over, testing its weight. "The question is whether the record copy matches this one. If Holt filed a corrected copy with the second signature filled in, he covered himself. If he filed this exact document, he left a hole." "Percival Adder at the land office," McAllister said. "He keeps certified copies." "He does," Dorothy said. "And I've already seen the record copy." She paused, letting him arrive at it himself. He arrived at it. "You already know." "I couldn't read the witness lines clearly in the light," she said. "I need to go back and look specifically." She folded the checklist back into her pocket. "But I'm fairly certain of what I'll find." McAllister straightened up. He walked to the window, stood with his back to her for a moment, hands at his sides. She recognized that posture. It was the posture of someone who had been carrying a weight long enough that the sudden possibility of setting it down felt almost suspicious, like a trap designed to look like relief. "If the lien falls," he said, "Holt loses his leverage on the property. And the easement Briggs wants becomes much harder to negotiate from a position of pressure," Dorothy said. "He'd have to ask you for it properly." "Which means you could say no, and it would mean something." McAllister turned around. "How long have you been working this out?" "Since Thursday evening," she said. "I had access to a set of state statutes, and about 3 hours." He looked at her for a long moment. "Miss Calloway," he said, slowly, as if the sentence required some care in the construction. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to understand it is a practical question with no—" He stopped. "No other intention behind it. "Ask it," she said. "Why are you doing this?" He kept his voice even. "You work for Briggs. If this goes the way you're suggesting, and Briggs finds out you helped me—" "He'll fire me," Dorothy said. "Yes." "I know." She stood, picking up her coffee cup with both hands. "Mr. McAllister, Warren Holt invented a man named Gerald Aldous and used him to send me across 3 states on a one-way ticket to a place where I knew no one and had no standing. He did that so he could see whether anyone was going to show up and ask questions about his arrangement." She looked at him over the cup. "I am someone who shows up and asks questions. That is not something I'm willing to stop doing because it makes a dishonest man uncomfortable." He was quiet. "Also," she said, "I spent 6 years being the person in the room who knew exactly what was in the documents and was never allowed to sign them. I am done watching men like Holt use the law as a private fence." She set the cup down. "Does that answer your question?" "Yes," he said, simply, without adornment. "Yes, it does." She went to the land office on Monday morning before her shift at the hotel. Percival Adder looked at her with his interrupted expression and did not ask why she was back. She asked for the McAllister lien file by case number. He retrieved it with the air of a man performing a sacred and unappreciated duty, set it on the reading table, and retreated. Dorothy opened it. The record copy had one witness signature. The second line was blank. She stood there for a moment, looking at the blank line, and felt something clean and cold move through her. Not triumph, not yet. Something more like the confirmation of a calculation, the satisfaction of a number that adds up. She asked Percival Adder for a certified notation of the document's contents as filed, paid the 25-cent fee, and walked out into the Abilene morning with a piece of paper that was small and plain and worth everything. She did not go to McAllister first. She went to Judge Carraway's office. Carraway was 62, white-haired, and had the measured patience of a man who had heard most of what human beings were capable of and had chosen not to be surprised by any of it. His secretary, the same one since 1869, as Nora had said, told Dorothy the judge was between appointments and would give her 5 minutes. Dorothy sat down across from Carraway's desk, placed the certified notation in front of him, and said, "I'd like your opinion on the enforceability of this lien." He read it. He read her notation. He asked 2 questions, one about the filing date, one about whether she had the original, and then he set both papers down and looked at her over his spectacles. "Where'd you come from?" he said. "Ohio," she said. "Legal secretary, 6 years." "For whom?" "Harlan Wood, Cincinnati. He passed in the spring." Carraway nodded slowly. "I knew Harlan Wood. Good man. Meticulous." He looked at the papers again. "This lien, as filed, is not enforceable under current Kansas statute. 1 witness instead of 2 is a deficiency that a competent attorney could have dismissed inside of a week." He paused. "The question is, why no one noticed?" "I think someone hoped no one would," Dorothy said. Carraway looked at her. "Holt's name is on this." "Yes, sir." "He's filed 4 liens in this county in the past 2 years. 2 were settled privately before they reached my desk. 1 was paid." He picked up the papers and handed them back to her. "The 4th is this one." "Were the other 3 valid?" Carraway said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "What is your interest in the McAllister property, Miss—" "Calloway. Dorothy Calloway." She kept her hands still in her lap. "I have no interest in the property itself. I have an interest in accurate documentation and in the correct application of Kansas lien law." She paused. and I am presently employed by Clement Briggs, whose brother signed as witness to this document, which means I will likely not be employed by him much longer." Caraway looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "You'll need an attorney to file the challenge." "I know. I'm working on that." "There's a woman attorney in Topeka," he said. "Ellen Marsh. She's been admitted to the Kansas bar since '74. Handles property disputes." He said it without comment, without the particular careful neutrality of a man making a statement he considered unusual. He said it the way he'd say any name, as information, practical and sufficient. Dorothy wrote it down. "Thank you, Judge." "Don't thank me," he said, going back to his papers. "I didn't tell you anything that isn't in the public statutes." She told McAllister that afternoon, at the stockyard fence where they had fallen into the habit of brief conversations between his work and hers. Accidental at first, then less accidental, then simply a fact of the day they both stopped pretending not to plan for. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, with his eyes on the cattle pen. "Marsh," he said finally. "Ellen Marsh, in Topeka." "Caraway gave me the name himself," Dorothy said. "He did." It wasn't a question. He turned it over. "He also told me," Dorothy said carefully, "that 2 of Holt's previous liens were settled privately, which means someone paid rather than challenged." She let that sit. "He may be counting on you doing the same." "I can't pay it," McAllister said. "If I had $400 sitting somewhere, I wouldn't have let the lien stand this long." "I know. That's why he picked the amount he did." She looked at him. "He didn't want you to pay it. He wanted it to sit there as pressure." McAllister's jaw tightened. "Pressure toward what?" "The easement Briggs wants gives the hotel access to your creek water. Your northern pasture is the access point. If Holt's lien forces you to sell or restructure, Briggs could acquire the pasture outright." She paused. "It's a 2-man arrangement. Holt provides the legal mechanism. Briggs benefits from the outcome." McAllister said nothing for a long time. A hand moved cattle in the pen behind them, calling out in the particular shorthand of men who worked together daily. The cold had settled harder since morning, the sky pressing down flat and white. "My father built that ranch," McAllister said finally. "He built it out of nothing. Came to Kansas with $60 and a mule and spent 20 years making it into something." His voice was level. It was not performing emotion. It was the flat, compressed quality of a man who had learned that feeling things loudly got you nowhere, and had internalized that lesson so thoroughly that even the things that mattered came out quiet. "I ran it wrong for 2 years after he passed. I know that. He stopped. "I was somewhere else in my head for a long time. I let things slide, and Holt saw that." "He watched for it," Dorothy said. "That's worse," McAllister said. "Yes," she agreed. "It is." He turned to look at her. "If I contact Marsh and move to challenge the lien, Holt's going to know where the information came from." "Probably." "And Briggs will know." "Yes." "You'll lose the job," he said. "Not a question, not an accusation. Just the fact of it, stated plainly, and with the weight of someone who understood what a job meant to a woman in Dorothy's position." "I know," she said. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking," she said. "I'm telling you what I found, and what can be done with it, and what the costs are. What you do with that is your decision." She held his gaze. "But Mr. McAllister, Holt sent me here expecting to use me and discard me. He thought I was nobody. He thought a woman alone, with no arrangements and no family, had no tools and no recourse." She paused. "I have a certified notation from the land office. the judge's verbal opinion, the name of a Kansas bar-admitted attorney, and 6 years of knowing exactly how men like him build their paper walls. I would very much like to use all of that. McAllister looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You're the most unsettling person I've met in a long time." It surprised a small sound out of her. Not quite a laugh, but close. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said, with the almost smile. The one that was becoming slightly more familiar, slightly less brief. "No, it is decidedly not a problem." He looked back at the pen. "I'll write to Marsh this evening. I'd like you to look at the letter before I send it." "I can do that," she said. "And Miss Calloway," he said it without turning, "when Briggs finds out, and he will find out, you'll need somewhere to land." "I have Nora's boarding house," she said. "That's accommodation," he said. "I meant work." Now he turned. "My books are a mess. I've been managing the ranch accounts myself since my wife passed, and I'm a fair rancher and a poor accountant. The job pays $15 a month, meals included, and the hours are your own, as long as the work gets done." He said it with the same directness he'd used to ask for her help at the stockyard. No softening, no performance. Just a man who had decided something and was stating it. "It's a legitimate offer." "No," he paused, with a care she was beginning to recognize as characteristic. "No other intention behind it." Dorothy looked at him. She thought of the empty chair at the head of his kitchen table, and the 2 coffee cups on the shelf that hadn't been moved, and the curtains hung without anyone who cared about curtains. She thought of the way he'd said, "I won't let that land on you," not as a promise meant to reassure, but as a statement of intent that had already been decided before he opened his mouth. She thought of Gerald Alvis, who had never existed, and the telegram that had sent her here expecting nothing, and had instead landed her in the middle of something that, for the first time in a long time, felt like it was hers to shape. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking," he said. She walked back toward town in the flat afternoon light, with the certified notation in her pocket, and $15 a month turning over quietly in the back of her mind. And she did not allow herself to feel too much about any of it until she was back on Chestnut Street, inside Nora's door, with the warmth of the house around her. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and let herself feel it. Not the fear, not the uncertainty, though both were present, solid and real. Something else, something under those, quieter and more stubborn. The feeling of a woman who had been handed a role she did not choose, and had decided, with both hands and her full attention, to rewrite it. She pressed her palms flat on the table. "All right," she told herself. "All right. Let's begin." The letter to Ellen Marsh went out on Tuesday morning with the 8 o'clock post. McAllister had written it in his kitchen the night before. Dorothy across the table from him with her own draft beside his, and they had spent an hour arguing quietly over language. He wanted plain, she wanted precise. And they arrived at something that was both. 3 paragraphs that contained the essential facts without a wasted word. Dorothy had copied the final version in her clearest hand because his, as she had noted without comment, was the handwriting of a man who had learned to write from necessity rather than instruction. "My teacher was a ranch hand named Dooley," McAllister said when she didn't comment, which was somehow worse than if she had. "He could rope a steer and do arithmetic, and that was the extent of his curriculum." "It's legible," Dorothy said. "That's generous." "I'm a generous person," she said, which was the driest thing she had said to him yet, and he looked at her with the almost smile fully formed for a moment, before she went back to the letter. She had slept better than she expected that night, back in the small room at Nora's, with the letter already sealed and the next steps already ordered in her mind. She had learned, somewhere in the Cincinnati years, that anxiety lived in the unordered. That the moment you named the steps and put them in sequence, the fear had less room to operate. She knew what came next. She knew what it would cost. She had made her decision. What she had not fully anticipated was how quickly Holt moved. Wednesday arrived, with Briggs waiting in the back office when Dorothy came in at 8. He was standing behind her desk, which was the first signal, and he had the easement document in his hand, which was the second. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. She did not sit down. Neither did he, which meant he wanted the height, wanted to manage the physical terms of the conversation. She had seen that before, in offices with better furniture and worse men. "I'm going to ask you something," Briggs said, "and I want a straight answer." "I've always given you straight answers," Dorothy said. "Did you pull land records on the McAllister property last week?" "I pulled the hotel's deed dispute records," she said, "as instructed." "And the McAllister file?" "It was on the same shelf," she said. "I noted the contents." Briggs set the easement document down. "And then you shared what you found with McAllister." Dorothy looked at him. "I shared a billing discrepancy with Mr. McAllister that directly concerned your hotel's accounts. That is my job." "Don't do that," Briggs said, his voice going flat. "Don't lawyer me with your own words. I know what you did, and I know why you did it, and I want to know who asked you to." "No one asked me to do anything," she said. "I found a document with a legal deficiency, and I informed the party whose property was affected." "You went against this hotel's interests." "I upheld the law," she said. "If those two things are in conflict, that is not my deficiency." Briggs picked up the easement document again and held it, not looking at it, using it the way men used paper in these moments, as something to do with their hands so they didn't have to think about their face. "Miss Calloway, I'm going to be direct with you." "Please," she said. "Warren Holt is a man with significant standing in this county. He has relationships with the bank, with the land board, with half the business owners on this street. If you think a piece of paper with a missing signature is going to undo 4 years of careful work—" "I don't think anything yet," Dorothy said. "I found a legal deficiency. What happens next is for a court to determine." "There won't be a court," Briggs said. "McAllister can't afford the attorney fees, and Holt will simply refile with a corrected document, and the lien stands." "An attorney in Topeka has already been contacted," Dorothy said. The room went quiet. Briggs looked at her with an expression she had not seen from him before. Not anger, which she had expected, but something colder. The particular stillness of a man recalibrating. "You move fast," he said. "I'm thorough," she said. "You said so yourself." He set the document down. "You're dismissed, Miss Calloway. Collect your pay for the week from the clerk." "I know," she said. She had already known. She had known since Monday. She picked up the 2 personal items from the desk, her pencil case and the small dictionary she'd carried since Cincinnati, and walked to the door. "Miss Calloway." His voice stopped her. "Holt will hear about this by noon. Whatever you think you're building, he will come for it." She turned. "Let him come," she said. "I've read the statutes." She walked out. The cold hit her on the front steps of the hotel like a physical fact she had to negotiate with. She stood there for a moment, her pencil case in one hand and her dictionary in the other, and took 3 careful breaths. Then she went to find McAllister. He was at the ranch. Eli Crane let her down from the borrowed horse she'd rented from the livery. $2 she hadn't budgeted for, filed mentally under necessary expenditures. And McAllister came out of the barn when he heard the hooves. He took one look at her face and said, "He fired you." "This morning," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come inside." The kitchen was the same as Saturday. Practical, orderly, that quality of careful maintenance. He poured coffee without asking, and set it in front of her, and sat across the table and waited. Which was something she had noticed about him. The way he waited without filling silence comfort. Most men she had known were afraid of silence. McAllister used it like a tool. "Holt will refile," she said, wrapping both hands around the cup. "Briggs told me as much. He said Holt would simply correct the document and refile." "Can he do that?" "Legally, yes. The original filing is void, but there's no bar to a corrected submission. Marsh needs to file the challenge and have the original declared invalid before he corrects it. If she can get a judge to review the original document and issue a formal finding of deficiency, it creates a record that makes the corrected version much harder to establish without scrutiny." She paused. "We need Marsh to move quickly." "I can send a telegraph today," McAllister said. "Do that." Dorothy set the cup down. "There's something else. Briggs said Holt would come for whatever I'm building." She kept her voice even. "He was talking about this." She gestured at the space between them, meaning the work, the documentation, the challenge. "But Holt may also move to undermine me personally." Reputation. Questions about why a woman from Ohio, with no connections in Abilene, is suddenly involved in a property dispute. McAllister's jaw tightened. "Who's going to believe that?" "Enough people," she said. "Briggs has his brother's signature on the witness line. The brother owns the feed store and has been in Abilene since 1868. I have been here 3 weeks." She looked at him. "I'm not saying this to frighten either of us. I'm saying it because we need to know where the attacks will come from." "And this is one of them," he said. "This is the most likely one," she said. "Character before documents. It's always character first." He stood up, went to the window, put both hands on the frame, not looking out but grounding himself, she had come to understand. That was his version of her hands flat on the table. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to send the telegraph to Marsh today and tell her the situation has accelerated. I need you to ask her for the fastest possible timeline on the challenge." Dorothy stood, picking up her coffee. "And I need you to tell me honestly whether there is anything in your history with Holt that he could use. Any debt, any dispute, any conversation that could be reframed." McAllister turned from the window. "That bad?" "Potentially," she said. "Tell me." He was quiet for a moment, working through it. 3 years ago, before my wife got sick, Holt approached me about a water-sharing agreement. Wanted access to the creek for a commercial laundry operation he was starting. I said no. He pushed. I said no again. He left, angry. He paused. "I didn't think anything of it at the time." "He put the lien on your property in September of this year," Dorothy said. "That's 3 years later. He waited." "He waited until I was in a weak position," McAllister said. "After Clara died, after the bad spring, after the accounts got behind." He said his wife's name plainly, the way you say the name of something that is part of you, not with performance, not with the careful navigation of grief displayed for sympathy, just the name as a fact. Dorothy noted it and moved on, because that was what he needed. "He timed it," she said. "That tells us something about how he operates. He doesn't act quickly. He prepares. He waits for the right moment." She set the cup down. "Which means he already has a next move planned." "What kind of next move?" "I don't know yet," she said, "but I'd like to find out before he makes it." Holt found her first. She was at the dry goods store on Thursday afternoon, purchasing flour and dried beans on a budget she had reconstructed from scratch, when she heard his voice behind her. "Miss Calloway." She turned slowly. Warren Holt in person was exactly what she had expected from his methods. Well-dressed, unhurried, carrying the particular ease of a man who had never yet been in a room where the advantage wasn't his. He was handsome in a practiced way. the kind of handsome that had been useful for so long it had become structural. "Mr. Holt," she said. "I thought we should meet properly," he said, as if this were a social call. "Given that we have some mutual history." "We have no mutual history," she said. "You invented a man named Gerald Aldous and used him to send me across 3 states." He smiled. Not the smile of a man who is embarrassed, the smile of a man who had been caught in something he considered too small to matter. "A clerical confusion," he said. "These arrangement services can be messy." "You are the arrangement services regional representative," she said. "The confusion was not clerical." He stepped closer, lowering his voice in the manner of a man offering a private courtesy. "I'll be direct with you, Miss Calloway. You are an intelligent woman who has found herself in a complicated situation that does not need to become more complicated. You've been in Abilene 3 weeks. You have no family here, no established connections, and you have just lost your employment." He paused, letting each item land. "Whatever you think you're doing with McAllister's property dispute, I want you to consider whether it's worth the cost." Dorothy looked at him. "What cost?" "Your reputation in this town is not yet formed," he said pleasantly. "That can go in any direction. A woman who arrives under unclear circumstances, inserts herself into a legal dispute between established men, loses her position within weeks." He tilted his head. "People make their own stories about situations like that. I'd hate for you to be the subject of an unflattering one." There it was, same as Briggs's word, complications, but with more specificity. Character first, Caraway had essentially confirmed by naming it before she did. Dorothy set her flour on the counter, paid for it, picked it up, and looked at Warren Holt with the complete attention of a woman who had spent 6 years learning to read men who stood behind desks and said things. "Mr. Holt," she said, "I was a legal secretary for 6 years. I have read approximately 8,000 documents in that time. I know what a valid lien looks like. And I know what yours looks like. And they are not the same thing." She kept her voice quiet and even. "I also know that a man who waits 3 years to act and times his legal maneuvers to coincide with a widower's worst season is not a man who is operating from a position of strength. He's operating from a position of patience, which is different." She picked up her package. "You waited for Mr. McAllister to be vulnerable. You underestimated how long that window would stay open. And you sent me here to test the waters, which means you were already uncertain." She paused. "Men who are certain don't test." Holt's smile had not moved, but something behind it had. "Good day, Mr. Holt," she said, and walked past him out the door. Her hands were shaking by the time she reached the end of the block, not from fear, or not only from fear. From the specific physical aftermath of holding yourself very still under pressure, the way a spring shakes when it releases. She stood at the corner with her flower under her arm and breathed until the shaking stopped. Then she went to find Nora. Nora listened to the whole thing from her chair by the fire, mending in her lap, needles steady. She did not interrupt. When Dorothy finished, Nora bit off a thread and said, "You told him he was uncertain." "Yes." "To his face?" "Yes." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Was he?" "I think so," Dorothy said. "If he was certain, he'd have already filed the corrected document. He hasn't." She sat forward. "He came to talk to me instead, which means he's trying to assess what I have, what I know, whether I'm actually a problem or just a nuisance." "And which one are you?" Nora asked. "I'm a problem," Dorothy said. "I'm just not sure he knows that yet." Sam appeared in the doorway, took one look at the two of them and said, "Is this the serious kind of conversation or the planning kind?" "Planning," Dorothy said. "Can I stay?" "No," said Nora. "Okay," he said, and did not move. "Samuel." He retreated with the particular dignity of a child who has decided that withdrawal is a tactical choice and not a defeat. Dorothy almost smiled. "He'll move fast now," she said, returning to Nora. "Holt, I've shown him I know more than he thought. He'll want to refile the lien before Marsh can have the original declared void." "Can he do that before Marsh acts?" "Depends on how quickly Marsh responds," Dorothy said. "August sent the telegraph this morning. If she can file a motion for review this week—" She stopped. "It's very close." "Then it comes down to speed," Nora said. "It comes down to whose paperwork arrives on Judge Carraway's desk first," Dorothy said. "Ours or Holt's corrected filing." The telegraph from Ellen Marsh arrived Friday evening. McAllister brought it to Nora's house himself, which was the first indication that its contents were significant enough to require a face rather than a messenger. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands and said, "She's coming." Dorothy looked up from the table. "Marsh is coming here?" "She's been working a property dispute in Newton that settled this week. She's passing through Abilene on Monday." He came inside, handed her the telegraph. "She wants to see the original document and meet both of us before she files." Dorothy read the message. Efficient, direct, no wasted words. The telegraph of a woman who had made her peace with brevity. She would arrive Monday noon. She wanted the original lien, the certified notation, and any additional documentation they had. She had read the initial letter and had one preliminary question. Who was the notary? "Douglas Ferris," Dorothy said. "He notarized the document." "I know Ferris," McAllister said. "He does work for half the businesses in town, including the hotel." Dorothy set the telegraph down. "Then Holt may know already that Marsh is coming." "If Ferris is in Holt's pocket—" "He may not be," McAllister said. "Ferris is—" He paused, choosing carefully. "He's a man who follows the law because he's afraid of the consequences of not following it. That's different from loyalty." "Then he might be our witness," Dorothy said slowly. McAllister looked at her. "If Ferris notarized a document with a missing witness signature," she said, "he either didn't notice, which is negligence, or he did notice and signed it anyway, which is complicity. Either way, Marsh could call him." She looked at McAllister. "A frightened man with no loyalty is easier to turn than an honest man with conviction." Which sounds wrong, but it's true. "I don't know how it sounds," McAllister said. "I know you're right." They sat at Nora's kitchen table, Nora having tactfully removed herself to check on something she'd been checking on for the past 15 minutes, and went through the full documentation together, piece by piece. The original lien, the certified notation, the land office record copy, Dorothy's checklist of statutory requirements. At some point, the lamp needed adjusting, and they both reached for it at the same moment, and their hands nearly met over the glass chimney. And there was a pause that lasted exactly long enough to be something before they both withdrew. "I'll get it," McAllister said. "Thank you," Dorothy said. They went back to the documents. But the pause stayed in the room with them, the way certain things stay once they've entered. Not intrusive, not demanding anything, just present. Dorothy kept her attention on the paper in front of her. So did he. But the quality of the silence between them had shifted by a degree that was small and significant, and neither of them named. At 9 o'clock, McAllister put the documents back in their envelope and said, "I should get back before Eli starts worrying." "Monday, then," Dorothy said. "I'll meet you at the land office at noon." He stood, put on his coat, picked up his hat. At the door, he stopped with his back to her for a moment, the way he sometimes stopped, working something out. "Miss Calloway," he said. "Yes?" He turned. I want to say something, and I want you to take it in the spirit it's intended, which is the careful pause again, the one she had learned to recognize as genuine rather than strategic. Entirely straightforward. "I'm listening," she said. "When all of this is finished," he said, "one way or another, when Marsh has done what she can do, and the documents are filed, and whatever the court decides is decided." He held her gaze. "I would like to know what you decide. About staying. About the work. About—" A pause. "About whether Abilene is where you're going to put your feet down." Dorothy looked at him. The lamp was burning steady behind her. Nora's house was quiet. Somewhere down the street, a dog was making an argument about something. "Ask me then," she said, "when it's finished." He nodded. It was the nod of a man who had offered something real and had it received in kind, no more and no less than what was given. "Good night, Miss Calloway." "Good night, Mr. McAllister." The door closed behind him. Dorothy sat for a moment, with her hands flat on the table and the documents between them, and something in her chest that was not yet named, but was no longer pretending it wasn't there. She had come to Kansas to build a life. She had arrived on a platform in the cold with 17 cents and a torn telegram, and the particular desperate practicality of a woman who had run out of other options. This was not what she had been building toward. It was something she hadn't known to plan for. She folded the certified notation back into its envelope, banked the lamp, and went upstairs. Monday was 3 days away. Marsh was coming. Holt was moving. Everything that happened next would happen fast, and Dorothy Calloway intended to be ready for every piece of it. Ellen Marsh arrived on the Monday noon stage with a leather satchel, a wool coat the color of charcoal, and the unhurried efficiency of a woman who had learned that the world moved faster when you didn't announce yourself. She was 40, sharp-featured, with gray already threading through dark hair she wore pinned back without vanity. She shook Dorothy's hand first, then McAllister's, and said, "Show me the document." They went to Judge Carraway's office by mutual agreement. Neutral ground, a room with a table large enough for 3 people, and a set of statutes, and a man who had already seen the certified notation and could answer procedural questions without being asked. Carraway received Marsh with the measured respect of one legal professional acknowledging another, poured no coffee, and sat in the corner with his hands folded while the 3 of them worked. Marsh read the original lien in full silence. Then she read it again. Then she set it down, opened her satchel, and produced a copy of the Kansas statutes on secured interests that was more annotated than Dorothy's, which Dorothy noted with professional appreciation. 2 deficiencies, Marsh said. Missing witness signature is the first. The second is the property description. She pointed to a line in the middle of the document. This describes the northern boundary by reference to a creek landmark, the fork at Calloway Creek. There is no Calloway Creek in the Abilene County plat records. I checked on the train. McAllister leaned over the table. The creek on my northern boundary is called Miller's Fork. Has been since my father's deed in 1861. Which means the property description in this lien does not accurately identify the encumbered property, Marsh said. Combined with the missing witness, you have a document that fails on 2 independent statutory grounds. She looked up. This was not sloppiness, Mr. McAllister. This was a document designed to hold up under casual inspection and collapse under real scrutiny. Someone expected you to pay the $400 to make it go away before anyone looked closely. He almost succeeded, McAllister said. Marsh glanced at Dorothy. Fortunately, someone looked closely. She closed the statute book. I'll file the motion for formal declaration of invalidity with Judge Carraway this afternoon. If Holt attempts to refile a corrected document after the motion is entered, he will be doing so in full knowledge of a pending legal challenge, which changes his exposure significantly. She looked at Caraway. Judge, I'd like your confirmation that you'll accept the filing today. I'll accept it, Caraway said from his corner. I'll also note for the record that the notary on the original document is a member of this county's professional registry and may be subject to review. Marsh nodded once. Douglas Ferris. The same. I'll want a word with him, Marsh said, and the way she said it was the way you say something is already decided. Holt moved at 2 o'clock. Dorothy was at Nora's table, working through the McAllister Ranch account books. She had accepted the position 3 days ago, with no ceremony and a handshake that lasted exactly the right amount of time. When Sam came in from the street, with his eyes wide and his dignity barely maintained. There's a man at the land office, he said. Eli from the ranch came to tell Mr. McAllister, and Mr. McAllister sent me to tell you. Dorothy was already putting on her coat. What man? Holt. He's filing something. Sam grabbed her sleeve. Eli said he had a new document, different paper than before. The corrected lien. Marsh had filed the invalidity motion at 1:45. Holt was filing the correction at 2. The question was sequencing. Which entered the record first, the challenge or the corrected claim? And in Kansas in 1876, the answer to that question lived in Percival Adder's filing timestamp. Dorothy walked fast, not running. A woman running through downtown Abilene on a Monday afternoon would be noted, discussed, and used against her. But the walking of a woman who had somewhere to be and intended to be there. She reached the land office 3 minutes later. Through the window she could see Holt at the counter, document in hand, Percival Adder on the other side, with his pen raised in the way of a man about to stamp something. She pushed the door open. Holt turned. Adder's pen stopped. Mr. Adder, Dorothy said, keeping her voice professional and her breathing controlled. Has the motion filed by attorney Ellen Marsh this afternoon been entered into the record? Adder looked between her and Holt with the expression of a man who had been hoping his afternoon would be simple. Yes. Filed at 1:47. Then any subsequent filing related to the McAllister property lien is subject to that pending motion, Dorothy said. Mr. Adder, I'd ask you to note in the record that the document Mr. Holt is presenting was submitted after the Marsh motion was entered. You have no standing here, Holt said. His voice was even, but the evenness was working harder than it had been in the dry goods store. You are not an attorney. You are not a party to this matter. I am the accounts manager for the McAllister Ranch, Dorothy said, which makes me a party to any financial encumbrance on the property. She looked at him directly. Mr. Adder, please note the timestamp. Adder noted the timestamp with the relief of a man who had been given a procedural instruction he could follow without having to decide anything himself. His pen moved. The time went into the record. 2:03 in the afternoon. Holt set his document on the counter anyway. I'm filing this regardless. You're entitled to, Dorothy said. Attorney Marsh is entitled to respond to it in the context of the pending motion. Judge Caraway will sort out the sequencing. She paused. Would you like me to send word to her office, or would you prefer to do that yourself? Holt looked at her for a long moment. The pleasant surface of him had not cracked. Men like him did not crack in public. But the calculation behind his eyes was running faster than it had been. She could see it. The reassessment. The recalibration. The specific moment when a man who had been playing a long game realizes the board has changed, and he is not sure when it happened. You're making an enemy, he said quietly. No, she said. I'm making a record. She walked out. McAllister was waiting outside. He had come himself. Eli's errand had apparently not been sufficient to keep him at the ranch while the thing was in motion. He stood on the boards with his hat in his hands, and when she came through the door, he looked at her face and said, Well? Marsh filed first, Dorothy said. Holt's correction is in the record, but it's subordinate to the motion. Caraway will have to rule on the original before the corrected document has any standing. She stopped walking and looked at him. It's not finished, but we're ahead. He exhaled. A long, slow release, the kind that had been compressed for some time. When does Caraway rule? Marsh said within the week, given the strength of the deficiencies. She paused. She also said Ferris was cooperative. Ferris talked to her? This morning, before she filed. He confirmed that the document was presented to him for notarization with the second witness line already blank. He raised the issue, and Holt's man told him it would be filled in before filing. She looked at McAllister steadily. It wasn't. He let it go, McAllister said. He was afraid to push back, she said. Which is not the same as participating. Marsh made that distinction carefully. She paused. He'll cooperate with the court review. McAllister put his hat on. He looked up the street, then back at her, and there was something in his face that she had not quite seen there before. Not the almost smile, not the flat Kansas patience, but something quieter and more direct. You went in there alone, he said. You sent Sam. I sent Sam to warn you. I didn't expect you to walk straight into the land office while Holt was at the counter. It needed to be done quickly, she said, and I had standing. He was quiet for a moment. Are you all right? The question was simple. It was asked the way he asked things, without performance, without the hover of anxiety that turned care into pressure. Just a question that wanted a true answer. Dorothy considered. Her hands had stopped shaking before she'd reached the end of the block. Her coat was straight. The record had been noted. Yes, she said. I'm all right. He nodded. Come back to the ranch, he said. The books aren't going to balance themselves, and Eli's been entering the feed costs wrong since October. She almost laughed. That's not a small problem. No, he said. It isn't. Caraway issued his ruling on Thursday. The original lien was declared formally invalid on two independent statutory grounds. The corrected filing was suspended, pending review of whether it constituted a good faith correction or an attempt to circumvent a pending legal challenge. Ferris received a formal professional censure, not disbarment, not punishment beyond the record, but a mark that would follow his name in county documents. Holt's request to have the motion dismissed was denied. Marsh sent word from Topeka. The ruling was clean. If Holt wanted to pursue the property claim further, he would need to start from the beginning, with proper documentation, in full view of a court that had now seen how the first attempt had been constructed. The practical cost of that was higher than the potential gain. She expected him to withdraw. She was right. By Friday afternoon, Holt's attorney sent a letter to Caraway's office, indicating that the Holt and Associates' interest in the McAllister property was being released. No explanation, no apology, just the release, signed, filed, done. McAllister read the letter at his kitchen table, with Dorothy across from him and the account books open between them. He read it twice. Then he set it down flat and put his hand over it, palm down, the way you put your hand on something to make sure it's real. It's over, Dorothy said. It's over, he said. They sat with that for a moment, the way you sit with something you've been working toward long enough that its arrival needs a breath of space to be believed. Briggs, McAllister said then. He'll withdraw the easement request, Dorothy said. Without Holt's lien as leverage, he has no position to negotiate from. He'll look for another approach somewhere else, with someone less prepared. She paused. He's a practical man. Practical men move on to easier targets. And you? McAllister said. He said it carefully, looking at the letter under his palm. "He fired you because of this." "He fired me because I did my job accurately," Dorothy said. "Which is his problem, not mine." McAllister looked up. "You have work here," he said. "I want to make sure that's clear. Not as the careful pause, as a consolation arrangement. The work is real. The books are a genuine disaster. And I can pay $15 a month, as I said." "I know," she said. "I've been doing the books for a week. I found the October error and 2 in November, and I have a system that should prevent both from happening again." "I noticed," he said. "I also reorganized the filing cabinet in the office." "I noticed that too." "It was alphabetical before, but it should be chronological," she said. "For a working ranch, date order is more functional." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she had come to recognize as the one that preceded something he'd been deciding whether to say. "You don't have to justify the work," he said. "I hired you because you're good at it. I know you're good at it." "I know," she said. "I just like to be specific." "I know you do," he said, and the almost smile was there, fully, without the brief quality it used to have. Longer, more at home on his face. Dorothy looked down at the account books. The numbers were orderly now. Clean columns, each entry in its correct position. The story of the ranch told accurately for the first time in 2 years. She ran her finger down a column and found the balance she'd been working toward. The one that showed the ranch operating at a sustainable margin once the lien was removed from the liability column. "You're in better shape than you thought," she said. "The ranch or the general situation?" She looked up. He was watching her with that directness he had, the one that didn't ask for anything, but didn't hide anything either. "The ranch," she said. "And the general situation?" he said. Dorothy set her pencil down. She thought about the platform at Abilene 3 weeks ago. The cold, the torn telegram, the 17 cents. She thought about Nora opening a door and not asking why. About Sam and his philosophical biscuit. About a land office shelf and a missing witness signature, and the particular click of a number that adds up. She thought about a man who had said, "I won't let that land on you," and had meant it before he had any reason to, before she had given him anything except the correct identification of a billing error. She thought about what it meant to arrive somewhere expecting one thing and find, under the rubble of that expectation, something you hadn't known to want. "The general situation," she said slowly, "is better than it's been in a long time." He nodded, not pressing, not reaching for more than she'd given. That was the thing about him. He received what was offered and waited for the rest, without the impatience that turned waiting into pressure. She had known very few people like that. "Ask me," she said. He looked at her. "Ask you what?" "What you said you'd ask when it was finished." She held his gaze. "It's finished." McAllister was quiet for a moment, the way he was quiet when the thing mattered. Not absent, but present in the particular concentrated way of a man taking something seriously. Then he said, "Are you staying in Abilene?" "Yes," she said, "because of the work." "Because of the work," she said. "And because Nora's house has good walls, and Sam is the most honest person I've met in 3 states. She paused. "And because I came here expecting nothing and found something worth building, and I'm not the kind of woman who walks away from something worth building." He looked at her. "That's not all I was going to ask." "I know," she said. "Then I'll ask the rest when I've thought of the right words for it," he said. "Take your time," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." She went back to the accounts. He went back to the letter, finally folding it and setting it aside. And then he reached across the table and moved the lamp slightly so the light fell better on her column of figures, without being asked, without comment. Just the quiet, practical attention of a man who had noticed what she needed before she had. Dorothy wrote the balance at the bottom of the column, drew the line beneath it, and let it stand. The lien release was recorded at the land office on the following Monday. Percival Adder stamped it with his interrupted expression and filed it in the correct location without being asked twice. Dorothy watched him do it and felt the thing close, not dramatically, not with the fanfare of a concluded battle, but with the quiet finality of a door that had been swinging for weeks, settling into its frame. She walked out into the Abilene morning with a receipt in her hand. Nora was at the dry goods store across the street, Sam beside her carrying a basket with the martyred patience of a child who had been told this would only take a minute. He saw Dorothy first and raised his hand. She raised hers back. "Well?" Nora called. "Filed and recorded," Dorothy said, crossing the street. Nora looked at the receipt, nodded once with the satisfaction of a woman whose faith in the outcome had been practical rather than hopeful, and handed it back. "Then go tell your rancher," she said. "He's been at the feed store for an hour and a half pretending to care about grain prices." Dorothy looked down the street. McAllister was, indeed, visible outside the feed store, talking to Jerome Briggs's replacement, the brother having quietly stepped back from public business in the wake of his witness signature appearing in a court document, with the focused attention of a man who was not quite as focused as he appeared. She walked toward him. He saw her when she was halfway there, and the question on his face resolved the moment he saw hers. She held up the receipt. He crossed the remaining distance between them in 4 strides, which was the most quickly she had ever seen him move toward anything, and took the paper from her hand, read it, and stood there, holding it with both hands, the way his father must have stood holding the original deed in 1861, with the particular weight of a man receiving something he had worked for and feared losing, and was now, finally, keeping. "It's done," Dorothy said. "It's done," he said. They stood on the Abilene street in the December cold with the receipt between them and the year ending around them, and the particular stillness of 2 people who have come through something together and are standing on the other side of it, feeling the ground under their feet and finding it solid. "I thought of the words," McAllister said. She looked at him. "Already?" "I've had a week," he said. The almost smile was fully itself now, with no reservation in it. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to take it in the spirit it's intended, which is entirely honest and not at all complicated by anything except the fact that I mean it." "Ask it," she said. "Will you stay?" he said. "Not for the work, not for Nora or Sam or the account books or any practical reason, though all of those are real." He held her gaze with the directness she had come to trust completely, the directness of a man who did not say things he didn't mean and did not withhold things he did. "Will you stay because you want to? Because this is where you want to put your feet down?" Dorothy looked at him. She looked at the receipt in his hands and the street behind him, and the flat Kansas sky above Abilene going pale gold at the edges with the angle of the December sun. She thought of Cincinnati and the desk she'd cleared out and the ticket she'd bought with everything she had left. She thought of a platform in the dark and a torn telegram and 17 cents. She thought of all the things she had survived by being careful and practical and precise. And she thought of this man, this town, this life assembling itself piece by piece around her, like a house being built from the inside out. And she understood that some things could not be approached with precision, could not be measured or documented or filed in chronological order. Some things you simply had to choose. "Yes," she said. "I'm staying." He nodded. It was the nod of a man who had placed a bet on something he believed in and had just been proven right. Quiet and certain and deeply satisfied. "Good," he said. And then, after a pause that was exactly the right length, The books for December are already behind." Dorothy took the receipt from his hand, tucked it into her coat pocket, and said, "Then let's get to work." She had come to Kansas with nothing but the wreckage of someone else's plan, and a particular stubborn refusal to lie down under it. She had arrived broken, and had built something anyway. Not the life that had been arranged for her, not the shape that other people's designs had tried to press her into, but her own, built board by board, and entry by entry, and choice by deliberate choice, in a town that had not known her name 3 weeks ago, and would not easily forget it now. Dorothy Calloway had not found what she came looking for. She had found something better. The life she built with her own hands, in the place she chose to stand, beside a man who had never once asked her to be less than exactly what she was. She had stopped running. She had stopped waiting. She had simply, finally, begun.